from personal experience growing up, this is what confused me personally about education. As I'm growing up, as a very young person, 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, I'm reading about everybody in history that's done something great, something good, invented something. But my own people. If I see something of a person of African descent in a history book or some other type of social studies literature, there's something demeaning. Turned me off about education. I experienced the same, I talk about it in my book, psycho personality. How we get caught up in this CYCLE of thinking and behavior. And we get trapped and it's hard to break out of it. You become addicted to having a feeling of low self-esteem, illiteracy, like me. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't see where education was beneficial to me. I didn't see nothing in the educational program other than math and science that I might be able to benefit from. But the rest of it, even the pictures around the wall, President Washington, Lincoln, everybody, and what I understood about all these gentlemen, they were owned slaves themselves. So we're gonna have to address this education thing, how we teaching our children about how to see themselves, how to perceive themselves. And this is the main problem. So if a child, and I understand this greatly, if a child hates his or herself, and when they look in the mirror, they just see, I don't like nothing else in the mirror that I see. So how can I look at you, anybody else in this audience, and find something that I can love or like? I don't even like me. And this is the biggest problem in school. When you see the bullying and carrying on, what do you think these bullies, what create the mentality of a bully? He one that don't like himself. So he looked at others, especially smaller, somebody that they know they can get a definite win out of, push around and make feel bad because they feel bad. And we are social animals. Nobody wants to be alone. I want some company. If I feel bad, I want you to feel bad. I want everybody in here to be miserable. And that was some of the things that I did in the classroom. I wasn't about to have peace in the classroom if I wasn't having peace. Well, nobody gonna have peace. So I was a class clown. I kept still, I wouldn't let the teachers teach. And I see the same thing. That's what kind of makes me effective in the school system today. I understand the thinking, the mentality of these young people who wants to create disruptions in the classroom. I know what they're going through. And sometimes I ask them some of the same questions. What is your race? I never get the same answer. And it's like taking an African American, I use the analogy of the ant and the spider in America when it comes to people of African descent. You take a people of African descent, let's say it's the people of African descent is an ant. You take the ant out of the womb of its mother, baby ant, infant, and expose it to an environment of spiders and have these spiders raise that ant. Watch that ant grow up and try to mimic the spider. This is what African Americans do in America. They mimic everybody, everything but themselves because they don't know who they are. And so when they come in, that's the reason why the violence is so great. African American against another African American. Hate ourselves, so we hate each other. That's why we are quicker to kill one another than we kill anybody else or anything else. We'll kill each other before we kill a dog or a cat. Just that easy. And this is the attitude that we see in the education system. If we don't address, see, all we talk about most of the time in the public is the symptoms of the deviant behaviors. Oh, look at that person, look at that person. but we don't deal with the causes. And I believe this is what my sister here, Ms. Douglas, was talking about, that we don't get into what causes our young people to think the way they do. Look at the parents in many cases. Some of you are aware of it. Many of our students, we can just look at, I can see the parent before I even see the parent in actuality. I can almost see the parent in the child. I see alcoholism. I hear the language. Where does a 5-year-old child learn to use some of the foul language that they use? I can't call names, but just recently, I had a 7-year-old child, female, hit me in the head with a book when I wasn't looking, because she's angry. And this child is angry on many occasions when that child comes to school. The school's not doing it to the child. This child has this type of attitude. Child can be very mean at sometimes. Sometimes he can be very sweet. But I turned my back on the child after taking the child from her seat because she was throwing stuff on the floor, her work that she's supposed to be doing. She was upset, frustrated. I was dealing with another child, a male child at the time, about the same age. So I just asked this child, hey, you stand over here for a minute while I deal with him. When I turned to deal with him, she bashed me in the head with a book. Took a book off the book cabinet and cracked me in the back of the head with it. Serious and hard time. Crying, just crying. She's upset. What make a 7-year-old child actually think they could get away with striking an adult? No fear. She's that angry. She's willing to, with the zero tolerance, death penalty, she's prepared to take any punishment that's due to her. But she's not even thinking about the punishment. She's thinking about how she's feeling at that time and with the enemy.
I think Terry had a comment to share as well.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that and then add another point. When my daughter graduated from high school here, and she graduated with honors, looking back on her curriculum, just specifically in her English classes, the only people of color that she read was Allende and Achebe. And fortunately for her, I had a library, an extensive library at home that reinforced her identity, like he is suggesting. And it's one point that I would like to make to parents: don't turn your education completely over to the school system. You must reinforce their identity at home. It's crucial for their own self-esteem and self-worth. Luckily, my children were exposed to Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou, Alice Walker, Zora Hurston. I can go on and on. But had I just allowed for her educational and for my son's educational process to be based in what the curriculum dictated at school, then they probably would be suffering to this day. And yes, they would be extremely angry, and so would I. But I would like to also add that there is an economic benefit to this school-to-prison pipeline, because we have this extensive prison industrial complex in this country that benefits from a steady stream of people going right into that system. It's almost as insidious as the tracking system that we used to have in place. I think we still have in place, but we call it something different, where early on you sort of determine through so-called testing what the potential is of the child, and then you sort of send them into a system that keeps them stagnated and prevents them from developing, and kind of aligns them right into either a so-called vocational track, or just makes them very frustrated, and they ultimately end up dropping out. I mean, just think about what our dropout rate is in this country. At the same time, you have communities that don't have, they rely on one particular industry, they don't have a diverse economic structure, and so then what would be more beneficial than having a jail or a prison or something set up right in the community? It's almost kind of like a Walmart, where you have a group of individuals that are kind of readily prepped for being sent into kind of lower economic strata or being sent into the system. And it is directly tied to our educational system. And it's something that we can address. We don't have to sit back and just allow this to happen. We need to see the potential in all our children. They all have certain gifts and talents, and the schools need to be able to have the freedom to address that. Teachers, I do not blame teachers. They are very constrained by this No Child Left Behind so-called accountability policy. And I think that there is a direct correlation between the institution of that policy and the increasing growth of children that are being sent right into the juvenile justice system and then ultimately into the adult prison system. And actually some are being sent into that system as children. So that's also something that's rather insidious. And I applaud the ACLU for being at the forefront of addressing that and bringing it to the attention of the public.
So we've talked about some positive tactics to turn this around, talking about, teaching people to embrace their culture, learn more about that, to have more positive attitudes and positive disciplinary measures by teachers and principals in schools. Bill, if you could address, if there is an incident and someone's caught up in that school-to-prison pipeline, what's the danger here? What can really happen to those students on their first encounter with the juvenile justice system if those positive measures aren't used and they're sent that way?
Well, first let's look at what the solutions have been in the post-Columbine era. I mean, basically after Columbine, people got scared of anything that could occur in the schools. And what was our solution? Our solution wasn't to deal with young people with normal adolescent behaviors and understanding of the science of adolescent brain development and child development that we have on one side. Instead, what did we do? We put more and more law enforcement officers into the schools. In fact, at IPS, we have two competing situations there, I believe, with the kind of behavior specialists classroom that you would run versus IPS having its own police force. How many of you went to school that had its own police force when you were in middle school or high school? I grew up in New York City. I went to city schools. I saw one policeman in a school one time during my high school career. That was post riot time in New York. But that's the only time I ever saw policemen in school. Now we have what we call school resource officers. School resource officers are basically an increased presence of law enforcement in the schools. Rather than deal with preventive behavior interventions or at the lowest elementary level or the high school, middle school level, what have we done? We have increase the presence of law enforcement, and what happens, zero tolerance policies go hand in hand with that increased presence of law enforcement in the school, and those folks traditionally respond to student misbehavior. How? Primarily through arrest and referral to the juvenile court. These severe policies, they've been ostensibly intended to increase safety in the schools, but have they? No. New York City has provided a good model with their original impact strategy, where they just increased they had more and more police officers in the schools. What happened? Well, guess what? It's just like putting more and more police on the street in a particular neighborhood. The number of arrests go up. Not that the severity of the behavior had changed, but we were then taking typical adolescent and child misbehavior and criminalizing it.